The Kremlin has confirmed that Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov will meet a U.S. delegation in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to discuss the Ukraine war. He'll be accompanied by Foreign Policy Advisor Yuri Ushakov. The news comes after the arrival of U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Riyadh. Meanwhile, European leaders will hold an emergency summit in Paris about Ukraine's future after the U.S. excluded them from the Saudi Arabia talks. Well, we have a team of reporters following the latest developments. Natasha Butler is in Paris. Charles Stratford is in the Ukrainian capital. But first, let's head to Yulia Shapovalova. She's joining us live from the Russian capital with confirmation from the Kremlin, Yulia, that Foreign Minister Lavrov will meet U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Riyadh.
Yes, absolutely. It's been officially confirmed that the Russian delegation led by Foreign Minister Lavrov is going to Riyadh for talks with the delegation from the US, Putin's foreign policy advisor Yuri Ushakov, Foreign Intelligence Service Director Sergey, and head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund Kirill Dmitriev. All are to be involved in the talks. And we just heard from Foreign Minister Lavrov. He expressed doubt that the European side needs to join the negotiations at their early stage. And ahead of the talks, he reiterated that the topic of territorial concessions to Ukraine are out of the questions. So everything that Russia has taken in the course of the last 3 years will remain with Russia, according to Lavrov. Meanwhile, according to Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, Russia carefully recorded all the statements said and issued at the Munich Security Conference. So the issue of deploying a peacekeeping contingent in Ukraine by the EU is something that no doubt concerns Moscow. And now we've heard from the UK that it's ready to provide its troops for deployment in Ukraine if a peace agreement is signed. So according to Peskov, it remains to be seen what the talks in Riyadh will bring. Whether there will be a breakthrough in the forthcoming Russia-US negotiations, whether they will help end the war as soon as possible remains to be seen as well. But all these activities are on everyone's lips here in Russia. On the one hand, these very tangible, so to speak, efforts by the American side, which can lead to a tectonic shift in resolving the conflict and in strengthening and resuming Russia-US relations. All that, of course, brings a lot of hope. On the other hand, there's a lot of skepticism because everyone understands that the negotiations are going to be very, very hard because the positions of Russia and Ukraine really diverge at the moment.
Yulia, thank you very much for that. Yulia Shapovalova with the latest live in Moscow. Let's bring in Charles Stratford. He's joining us live from Ukraine's capital. And Charles, we've been hearing from Yulia about a lot of hope, perhaps a bit of skepticism. How do Ukrainians feel about the prospects that have been announced by the US in the past week and all of these movements, these meetings being held away from them?
I think, Liz, it's important to really sort of contextualise exactly what Ukraine has suffered over the last 3 years, when it's fair to say that there has, certainly over the last year or so, been almost a tangible sense of growing war fatigue. And with that, a growing realisation that they may never get back the 20% of land that Russia now occupies. And those kind of feelings were more heavily solidified, of course, in the last week at Munich, where we saw the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying that a return to the 2014 borders was unrealistic. Now, bear in mind that the West has spent hundreds of billions of dollars worth on supplying Ukraine with military hardware. There have been 2 counter-offensives in the last 3 years. The first one was relatively successful, but the second one has been described by military analysts as pretty much an unadulterated failure. We don't have official statistics on the amount of civilians that have been killed in the 3 years of this war. But interestingly enough, President Zelenskyy himself offered statistics on the amount of military personnel that have been killed so far. 46,000, he says. 380,000 military personnel injured. and tens of thousands either missing in action or believed to have been taken captive. Then there's obviously the fact that so much of Ukraine's industry and its economy has suffered. Interestingly, only last month, the last coking coal mine, which is actually in Pokrovsk, was closed down. Pokrovsk now, as we know, is the centre of so much fighting as Russians try and push forward and take full control of it. But of the 21 coal and coking mines in this country, 13 of them are now in the Russian-occupied areas. So, as I say, war fatigue, this growing realization over recent months that they're in a very, very difficult position, and ongoing fears, security fears on how to go forward, especially when America seems to be pulling back its support. But at the same time, there is a sense, despite all those difficulties, that there might well be light at the end of quite a long tunnel towards peace as these negotiations begin.
Charles, thank you for that. Charles Stratford joining us live from Kyiv.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.